Today the disciples have a question for Jesus. Who is the greatest in the kingdom? And this topic, this theme of who's the greatest in the kingdom, was a theme that was permanently in the hearts of the disciples. For example, do you remember when the apostles James and John came to the Lord and said, "Lord, is it possible for us to take the first seats in the kingdom?" Do you remember that other instance of the gospel when the disciples were speaking at a certain distance of Jesus, discussing among them who was going to be the first one in the kingdom? And then Jesus had to ask them, "What were you discussing about on our way here?" So the disciples always were concerned and preoccupied about who was to be the first in the kingdom. And I think there was a little selfishness and a little human interest in this question. Who's going to be the most important among us? And how Jesus solves this question is very interesting because he always gives unexpected answers. For example, when James and John asked him about being the first ones, Jesus said, "Whoever is your server, he will be the first in the kingdom. Whoever makes himself the last one to serve the rest, he will be the first in the kingdom." And today also Jesus gives an unexpected answer. He says, "Whoever becomes like one of these small ones, whoever becomes like a kid or a child, he will be the first in the kingdom." So this is interesting because normally when we think about being the first in the kingdom, we think about, who's the strongest? Who's the more capable? Who's the most powerful? Who has the most leadership skills? But Jesus today says, whoever wants to be the first one has to be like a child. Unexpected answer. So what is Jesus pointing at? He's saying, whoever wants to be the first one has to trust and has to surrender to God his Father in the same way that a child surrenders to his father. So today, let me finish the homily with this question. Do you surrender to God your Father in the same way that a child trusts in his own father? In the same way that a child finds protection, warmth, confidence in his father, do you surrender and trust in God your Father? If we want to be the first in the kingdom, that is the trust that we must have in our Father. The same trust that a little child has in his biological father or in his spiritual father. So let us ask today to God our Father to remember that desire that we have in our hearts to be the first ones like the disciples, it's not about being the most powerful, but rather it's about being able to surrender and being able to trust in the same way that a child trusts in his father.